if you were an advisor to a world leader today, for example, the conflict that's going right now in the Middle East with Israel and Palestine, which is very contentious, what would you suggest, something to those world leaders to do to come to a resolution?
Sometimes understanding ownership explains better why there is a conflict, and that it may or may not be able to solve it. So let's take Israel and Palestine. Okay, so you mentioned that there are actually 6 different claims that we make for why we own something, and only 6, which in itself is pretty amazing. One of those is first possession. It's mine because I had it first. So let's talk about how that plays out in Israel and Gaza, West Bank, or Palestine more generally. So the Israeli argument, I think, would be twofold. One of them would be if you actually read the Bible, we were there like 5,000 years ago, and then we're basically driven out by the Romans, the diaspora. And so there are a number of groups in Israel who still make that argument. And so it's ours because we were there first, before there were sort of Arab nations and such. That's first possession from the Israeli side. There's equally first possession from the Palestinian side, right? They say, hey, we were there on the land prior to 1949 when the United Nations created the State of Israel. And so our ownership claim is superior to yours because we were there first. So just looking at the simple claim, just look at the single claim of it's mine because I was there first, you've got this basic conflict. Another justification is it's mine because I'm holding on to it, right? Current possession. It's mine because I've got it, right? So just to illustrate this in a very simple example, let's say you're at a playground and you see a 1-year-old or 2-year-old playing with a toy shovel, and they're holding it. They put it down just to, they're distracted by something, and another 2-year-old picks it up. The first one turns around and starts crying. Why is it crying? It's crying because of first possession. It was mine and you took it. The other child may be crying because of current possession. I'm holding on to it. Right? Those are the thing that's important. The reason I'm not going to give you a solution is they're both legitimate justifications. Right? One of the key insights from our book is that ownership is essentially storytelling. And the question is, which story is more persuasive? There is no resource, there is no object that is absolutely one person's or another. There's always some kind of conflicting story anytime there's a dispute, right? And so, you can apply this current possession, first possession idea back to, with the founding of Canada and the United States, right? The colonization of North America. Obviously, the English and the French were not the first to be there, right? They were the First Nations. There were Native Americans that were living there. Why don't they get it? And so what the lawyers said at the time was, you're occupying it, you're possessing it, but you don't own it. You don't own it because you're not putting it to, quote, productive use. And so the idea is it's only yours if you make use of it. And the idea of living lightly on the land, of sort of following the wildlife and such as needed, but foraging, that was not the European vision of ownership. The European vision of ownership was built towns, was farming, fixed farming with walls, with the stone walls around it. And so any conflict you get, if it's a true conflict, each side's going to have a persuasive argument, story to tell about why their ownership claim is superior. And what using those 6 different archetypes tells you is, let's pick apart, so we understand at least what the claims are. But realize well that the story of territory is a story of the human condition, right? Throughout history, literally going back to the very first, time we came down from the trees, where there basically were effectively, group territories. This was this group's territory, that was that group's territory. Another group pushes in, invades. Is it now theirs? Right? And so, to give me another example, why isn't Iraq subject to a claim by ancient Babylon, that it should be theirs, right? At a certain point, claims of territory fade over time. But it's very difficult for those who are living there during that transition period.
Obviously these issues are very complex in nature, right? But it's interesting that you're kind of comparing this to these like more like trivial examples, like with the kids, and it's like, you know, fundamentally humans, we're acting almost like in a trivial way, but almost to like a greater extent with all these greater conflicts, right?
Because we're telling the same stories. And you may be telling a story in a sandbox or telling a story on the Gaza Strip, but it's the same story.
And why do you think we expand, you know, to these greater degrees like that? Like,
Well, because the only reason you need rules about ownership is when a resource is valuable and it's scarce, right? If there's a resource that no one cares about, who cares who owns it, right? If there's a resource that people care about, but there's so much of it, there's enough to go around, who cares who owns it, right? You two don't argue about which breath of air you're going to take. There's enough air in your studio that you can both breathe, right? Um, and by contrast, when you talk about Kashmir, when you talk about the West Bank and Gaza, when you talk about Taiwan, we talk about the South China Sea, we talk about any territorial conflict, the scarce resource is the land, and more than one side wants it.